How do you do? My name's George Barham. I founded the Express Dairy all those years ago. Of course, it was my father, Robert, who started it all back in the 1820s. He had a herd of cows down by the Thames near Charing Cross, before it was built up. He used to deliver door to door. Then he bought a dairy in the Strand, the oldest in London. They said Nell Gwynne shopped there. That's where I grew up. You know, I never wanted to be a dairyman. I was apprenticed to a builder. But I earned a bit extra as a balancer in my spare time. I bought milk from dairies with too much and sold it to those who were short. Anyhow, the business grew. And when I was 22, I bought my own dairy. But they were difficult times, you know. The Industrial Revolution meant London was getting more and more crowded. The fields had gone. The milk I sold came from cows kept in cramped, unhygienic conditions. I was determined to bring fresh milk in from the countryside. And I did.
In 1864, George Barham set up the Express Country Milk Supply Company by King's Cross Station, and he found farmers willing to supply him with milk. George was a pioneer, the first to use the new railways on a regular basis to bring fresh milk to some of the capital's 3 million people. His trademark, an express locomotive, and his motto was quality and service. The following year, George was able to prove the brilliance of his idea. London cows caught a plague. They all had to be slaughtered. And Express was the only company that could supply London with milk. But George wasn't content with just delivering milk. The link between dirt and disease was gaining acceptance. And as Lister was pioneering antiseptic operations, George began to design hygienic dairying equipment, which he sold through his dairy supply company. George invented the milk churn to keep out dirt and prevent spilling. He adapted the new refrigeration methods to keep the milk fresh. And he went on to sell his own lactometers and disinfectants, as well as pasteurizers, separators and scales. By the 1870s, he was also looking after his father's business. He had his own delivery round, and he was encouraging his small son's ambitions. By the age of 12, Titus Barham was selling buns in George's shop. Eventually, George's passion for quality prompted him to buy College Farm in North London in 1880. He turned it into a model dairy, where he experimented with new techniques such as bottling. The farm soon became an international dairying centre and even hosted the annual sale of pedigree Guernseys. The renamed Express Dairy Company won awards at all the agricultural shows. And George was rightly recognised as a leader in the dairy industry, not just at home, but across the British Empire. Indeed, he travelled as far as Canada to introduce dairying research, hygiene and education to all. He also led the way in setting the first legal standards for milk and cream to safeguard the consumer. No wonder then that Queen Victoria honoured both George's companies with the first of many royal warrants. After all, he had supplied her households with milk, dairying equipment and advice for many years. However, in the early 1890s, George had decided to free himself from his everyday business responsibilities. And in 1893, the year, by the way, that modern breakfast cereal was invented, George handed over control to his sons. Titus was given Express, and Arthur took over the dairy supply company. By the 1890s, London was expanding into the suburbs, thanks to the new underground railways. And Express saw an opportunity for a network of branch dairies, starting with Blackheath, Hampstead, Herne Hill and Muswell Hill. Open from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m, these were admired for their hygiene and equipment. By this time, office workers and shop assistants were streaming into London each day. Titus's early bun business had developed into a range of eating establishments, tea shops, cafes and light restaurants, no doubt frequented by some of those early commuters. And to guarantee a quality supply of bread, cakes and gateaux, the company bought a bakery. Social reforms were high on the agenda at the turn of the century, with innovations such as free education and talking pensions. And in keeping with this innovative approach, the company was among the first to introduce rewards for long service. As the Victorian era gave way to Edwardian times and man reached new heights of achievement, George Barham became the first dairyman to be knighted. It was a great occasion. Recognition for the pioneer, genius and inventor who laid the foundations of the modern dairy industry. He was to continue his active role until his death in 1913. Express lived on despite the hardships of the war years, and milk was the one food that Britain was self-sufficient in. However, Arthur's Dairy Supply Company, which supplied Express with wholesale milk, decided to cut its costs by merging with two other companies. They formed United Dairies, which later became Unigate. And at the start of the Roaring '20s, Express and United went into competition with each other. Once again, Express had to find its own sources of supply. But Titus was determined, and with his cousin Walter Nell as his new right-hand man, he offered free churns and labels and the promise of prompt payment to secure the supplies they needed. The '20s was a time of expansion and investment. With the acquisition of Marshall's Dairies, which supplied London's smart clubs, hotels and restaurants, its first creamery and a fleet of new lorries. Refrigeration was installed in all the 100 or more retail dairies, and the company built its first milk collection depot. As customers demanded higher standards, bottled milk became more popular. College farms started selling tuberculin-tested milk, and Express even tried out waxed paper cartons, 30 years ahead of their time. By the end of the decade, the company was proud to set the standards once more with the world's biggest and most modern dairy at Cricklewood. The '30s saw a new phase of expansion with Metroland house building, and Express started handling and packing eggs, began making yogurt, and experimented with the first milk tanker. These achievements were only marred by the death of Titus Barham, the man who had done so much to fend off the competition. But Walter Nell took over as chairman and led the company through the Second World War. Few Express buildings escaped bomb damage, but remarkably, Express customers never went without milk on their doorstep. The post-war years meant reconstruction, social reforms and free milk at school. Express opened new bottling plants and acquired a new dairy every year up and down the country. The prosperous '50s also brought labour-saving devices, more leisure time and more choice. The new supermarkets sold a growing range of food and household items. And Express was one of the first to try out the new concept. By the time of its centenary, Express had built up Britain's second largest chain of supermarkets, 33 stores in all. Clearly, the company wanted to be more than a dairy, and it went on to acquire fruit farms, a food company, and a chain of restaurants and hotels. But in this decade of space achievement, Express was also expanding its dairying interests. A vast new plant processed 1 million bottles a day. New cheese factories and creameries were built, and yogurt took off. Cricklewood was now producing 1 million cartons a week, and Express acquired Ski, the top-selling branded fruit yogurt. By the time man stepped onto the moon, Express was also looking at new horizons, and in 1969 it became part of Grand Metropolitan. This provided financial backing to support the company's further expansion plans. The era of the silicon chip saw investments in the largest cheese factory in Europe, a new cottage cheese plant, and a series of purpose-built distribution dairies, all designed to improve customer service. Head office moved to South Ruislip, and in 1975, the Queen and Prince Philip toured the new cheddar cheese factory in Scotland, the first dairy in the world to receive the British Standards quality mark. The 1980s have seen dramatic changes in lifestyles and eating habits, and Express has moved with the times, with convenience foods, fast foods, indulgence foods, and low-fat foods. The Express Country Milk Supply Company has grown into a successful multi-million-pound concern, employing thousands of people, bringing quality and service to every customer. And the company still supplies fresh milk to the doorstep, just as it did 125 years ago.